There comes a time in a man's life, you've sweated, you've given it your all, blood and tears. You've done every single thing the motivational speaker advises you to. 6 a.m. in the morning, clock out late, you've worked hard, and guess what? The universe rewarded all your effort and nothing happened. At the infancy of my career, I uninstalled all my social media. I worked as hard as possible. Please understand, let me paint an elaborate picture of how I started. In a room full of smokers, drug addicts, and people who had no bearing as touching my destiny. Yet, I would sit on the floor learning about the stock market. How does things work? What is tax? When everybody loses their money in the stock market, where does it go to? Because I was intelligent enough to understand that if I can find the pathway, the current of wealth, and intersect a little bit, I will become wealthy. Please understand, that's how I thought at age 18. What were you doing at 18? Aside whacking off to Pornhub. You wonder why you're poor. But that's far from the initial discourse. The point I want you to get today, that sometimes you might work as hard as possible, you might give it your all, and not become successful. I'll tell you why that is. You care about public opinion. Public opinion. I've taught it countlessly. How you think determines how you act. And most times, there are beliefs you sustain unconsciously. But one thing is consistent. You would always act in accordance to that belief. So you don't necessarily need to vocalize a belief or an affirmation. So long as you sustain the thoughts, you would always act in a consistency to produce that outcome. I believe looking neat is a priority. I believe I am judged by my appearance. So subconsciously, when I give out my clothes to the laundry guy, I share the story of before I go to have my bath in the night, I quickly pick up dumbbells and release some pumps. Now, that is not something I do consciously, but it originates from the mindset that I want to be fit. When public opinion is a priority, there are certain moves you cannot commit to. For instance, if I cared about what those roommates thought, what those guys thought about me, I won't get up by 6 a.m. in the morning, study the charts, learn the conglomerate, understand business, how those things work, understand the tax code. Years ago, I used to think people like Elon had a debit card containing $700 billion. That's how destitute of financial knowledge I had. I'm $5,000 up year to date. $5,000 only a few short years ago. It was incomprehensible to me that it's possible to amass a fortune of $5,000. And yes, since it's from a global standpoint, $5,000 might not have much bearing. It might be minuscule to some people. It might be lunch. But I'm speaking to the average man. $5,000 is a lot, let alone in passive income. In places like Nigeria, where you can go to school for 4 years and the entry point is $100 salary. I'm not kidding. You can go to school for 4 years, labor, get all kinds of certificates, and the entry point of a job is $100, $200. Public opinion. The moment you care more about what people think, what they would say. Should I be doing this? I'm terrified of speaking flawlessly because of the way they would associate me, because of the way society would ostracize me. I tell my people at the office, my staffs, stop waiting to attain a leadership position before you speak affirmatively, before you adopt certain responsibilities. If you want to be a leader in this company, start now. Start now. Do not wait for something to happen. Oh, I'm just a common marketer. If I speak loudly, they would assume it for overambitiousness, or I'm trying to be noticed. And I said to that lady, so what? If you're noticed and you get promoted or given more responsibility and your income increases as a consequence of that decision, and every single person within your radius gets promoted, their quality of life increases, is that a good thing? So why do you care? If public opinion is still a thing for you, you will not commit to the moves, the eccentric moves that transit you from point A to point B. Tear down public opinion. Stop caring. I'm speaking to you as a man who was ostracized from society, left, isolated. There's something it does to you because humans are social creatures. When you have nobody to talk to, nobody in your DMs, you turn on your Wi-Fi or mobile data, and guess what? No notifications pops up. That's how detached from society you are. The level of commitment is high. In a society that's mediocrity is the norm, they are fascinated with a man who detests mediocrity, decides to be himself, work as hard as possible, and as Francis Bacon famously put it, a man who luxuriates in solitude is either a wild beast or a god. I, my friend, am a god. Public opinion would limit you in ways beyond your imagination. That's why I took out time to explain the reality between your thoughts and your actions. If public opinion is still a thing for you, if you care how people think, what they would say when I do this, you would always be limited. And my whole life is like a puzzle. The sacrifices, the things I did previously are yielding benefits now. Had I not paid the price for success previously, where would I be now? Probably depressed, suicidal. And I understand what the average man is going through. If me, in all my greatness, sometimes I still think there is more. What happens to the average guy who has achieved nothing? No girlfriend, no status, nothing. Please understand, I have thousands of dollars and I still consider myself poor. I still tell myself there is more. There are a lot of things to do, a lot of investments to make. What happens to the average guy? Public opinion wear you down in ways beyond your imagination. So how do you get over this? It's a painful but necessary process. You need to stop caring. When you stop caring, discipline becomes easy. Motivation becomes easy. The reason you do not take action today, the reason you sleep in late is because you're concerned of public failure. What if it doesn't work? Or what would they say after putting all this effort? But my friend, let's say for instance, that was the case. So what? You're going to live your life in laziness, hoping for that lucky break. If we're all confined to a well, let's say a group of individuals, if we're confined to a well with the promise someone is coming to save us, guess what? The first thing I'll do is to try and climb my way out. And over time, if the ladder shows up, then I'm halfway there. If it doesn't, I'm still on my way out. That is the mindset you need to sustain. You don't wait there and hope somebody comes or something saves you. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way. I recall when I wanted to get my first property and the family behind the land refused to sell. They had a stereotype with successful young men. How can this young man buy this land? They said it's impossible. We don't want fraud money. I tried my best to explain to them the legitimacy of my income, but they would not have it. Now you see that wrong mindset again. You see that thought playing a role. That for so long as you sustain a thought, you would always act in accordance to produce the outcome. It's most likely wealth to young men has a negativity or a negative connotation associated with it. So wealth and old are colloquial. Wealth and old are familiar. Wealth and young is negative. At the end of the day, guess what happened? They didn't sell. I had to get my father to pose as the second buyer. That was the only way I acquired that property. Public opinion. Once you consider what people will think about you, what they would say. If I do this business, what would they say? If I fail publicly, what would they say? And most of us are not necessarily concerned with failure or public opinion. You're just concerned with failing in public. A video game, if you fail, what do you do next? You continue, right? Exactly. So why don't you take that same approach towards your life and destiny? Because it's most likely your failure has real consequence. Once you fail, you lose money, you lose relationship, you lose status, things of that sort. That's why most individuals are careful. Again, I'm not advocating for careless risk or taking action for the sake of action taking to reinforce yourself psychologically you're making progress. This is something we see in course buying and things like that, because individuals love goals. They would rather pay for things as opposed to go through the natural process. They rather swallow a pill than to go to the gym. They rather buy a course than to sit with a book. What are the price? I'll tell you why you prefer spending money. Because there's a dopamine rush associated with holding your card and imputing those digits. You feel like you're making progress. It's the same thing with betting. When you gamble, you have this dopamine. But if this team wins and it puts your mind on a thought trip of all the amazing things you do with your earnings. So it's not necessarily the gambling you are addicted to. You are addicted to the feeling of progress. So you are routing the same energy as a professional, only from a negative outlet. The way to stop is not by quitting gambling. The way to stop is by deriving that same feeling from a different outlet. Please understand, when you are confined to an addiction or there's something you struggle with, you're not necessarily addicted to the outcome. You're addicted to the feeling the outcome produces. Anyone who has been addicted to a pill or a negative activity will tell you over time the activity becomes less stimulating, such that they engage in those platforms as a ritual is what keeps them sane. So a man who has consumed adult content for years, decades in fact, is no longer necessarily interested in the movie. He's now doing it as a ritual, something that keeps him sane, a part of his day. That's the same energy with purpose. That's the same energy with building a business. You're engaging in that process to reinforce the psychology. You are making progress. People ask me, how is it possible for you to outlast destiny? This business has been on negative for years, and yet you still persist. Why is that the case? Because I sustain something incomprehensible to the average individual, which is delusion. I truly believe in myself. It's not failure unless you stop. It's not failure unless you stop. I recall at the infancy of this channel when I had 100 subscribers or thereabout. All of a sudden, I get this new subscriber. I click on the channel, and it's an old classmate of mine. So imagine the stigma, imagine the wrong interpretation that those guys who said, check me out in the next 5 years and you see who will be successful, is now supporting your small channel. That would have been a clear indication to stop, prevent any further embarrassment by stopping. But guess what I did? I increased to 2 videos daily. So those times will come. In fact, I struggle to tell a lot of stories about my challenges per se, because I do not see them as challenges. It's common sense. When the guy subscribed, like, I didn't think of it. It didn't cross my mind. I didn't feel shame. I don't know how to explain it to you, patrons. It's not something I think about. All of the problems in my life, I don't see it as problems. I see it as a prerequisite to success. This needs to happen in order for me to be successful. Do you understand? When I lost 5 million on a property deal, it needed to happen to keep me sane. I'll share a story with you. About to do this deal with an agent. He took me to the property, which was locked. Then he did something very interesting. He broke the lock in an attempt to show me the land. Already I was skeptical if it's your property. Anyways, he showed me around. I told him I'll get back to him. Everything was screaming red flag, red flag. I reached out to the man, and the price has increased. Tried to negotiate for the initial income, and he would not budge. Then this other agent takes me to this other land, of which I immediately grabbed to prevent the previous experience. I had my contractors lay block, and amidst construction, a man turns up, lays claim over the land, and that's how we have been battling from one courtroom to the other courtroom, and it's just been terrible. So from that one experience, although it cost me 5 million, although it cost a lot of money, although there's an emotional attachment associated with that property, although it's painful to lose, I never made that mistake again. So there are times where evil things happen to you, not because God wants to punish you, but to learn from that experience. I lost a lot of money on that rental deal, and I wouldn't make that mistake. Remember, it's not failure unless you stop. As always, my friends, pleasure speaking to you. I'll see you in the next one.